Okay, so what you want to do whenever you go to your metal supply store is, because of the different amount of carbon and different elements that are in the steel, that they put in the steel, plus the way it was rolled, the temperature it was rolled, it all changes. That all changes the malleability of the metal. So like this, so what I do is I like go to the sheet, take my thumb, and I bend it, and if it'll bend and stay bent, I want it. This stuff here has too much carbon, or the way it's rolled or whatever, and I'm pushing on it pretty hard and it springs right back. This is so strong that you can't shape anything with it. I can set my power hammer as hard as it'll hit, and it won't shape it. It'll only go one direction. It won't go both ways. Okay, so this is another pallet of 18 gauge. Still banded together. Obviously, we don't want the top sheet because it's got a little rust on it, but let's check the corners. See, look at that. See, look at that. Perfect. This is what we want. And this is 18 gauge cold roll. Another thing that I want to talk about is AK and DQ steel. AK is aluminum keeled, DQ stands for draw quality. What that is for deep draws in a press. Like if you're going to do a bowl, a deep bowl. They actually, whenever they make the metal, they'll either put silicone or aluminum in with the molten steel to give it some elasticity so it'll stretch before it tears. For a car, I really try to avoid using that stuff, especially for like a door panel, a door skin, or a roof rinsiter, or a quarter panel. Like on a door skin, it has some shape in it, but with the AK or the DQ steel, if you push that door panel in, that door skin in, when it comes back, it's not going to come back all the way because it's so soft. It actually will give up some of its strength and stay in position. And it's really not necessary. If you just do the metal test, the bend test, and that right there will tell you what you're using. So that being said, we are going to use the power hammer today. We're going to make the door skin for our 32 3-window project that we're chopping. The 32 3-window door skin has a whole bunch of shape in it. I mean, it's really deep here. And one of the problems with the 32 3-window, if you'll notice an original car, the door has more shape in it than what the cowl and the body does. So here at the back of the door, sometimes if you're looking down the side of the body, it does this, so it gives it this like this, so it looks kind of like a butt crack, you know, like this. So what we're going to do, this is the exact shape of the door, of a factory door, but I'm going to relieve it just a little bit so it doesn't have as much shape, so we avoid having that butt crack look on the side profile of the car. So with that being said, we'll cut a piece of metal and then we'll get started. I'm only going to use one die in the power hammer. I generally have the one low crown die that I use for all my panels, but we will set the machine where it's hitting really hard. So we'll set the machine on kill and then rock and roll on this thing. So we'll clean this up real good. Any dirt or anything that's on the metal, when we run it through the power hammer, if it's on there, it'll leave an impression. It'll bury it in the metal. Cleaning it with acetone to begin with, and then I use WD-40 for the lube for the hammer. Some guys mix kerosene and transmission fluid or whatever. It doesn't matter. Just make it where it's slick. And you don't want to have too much lube on top of your metal whenever you are too thick of lube on your metal, because what will happen is whenever the hammer die hits, if there's a skim coat of oil on there, it will actually hydraulic it into the panel, and you'll get these little rings all over the place that you can actually feel. And what it's done is that oil has enough viscosity that when it hits it so hard that it hydraulics it into that steel, and it'll leave a divot. So that's why you want something real thin on there, like WD-40 or something thin that won't evaporate. Because once it's going through the hammer, if it hits a dry spot, I mean, you just basically stop. It'll stop you. So, but you don't want too much viscosity, or it'll hydraulic it in there and it'll ruin your panel. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Yoder power hammer. This is like the mystery machine of power of metal shaping. Truly, all it is a motorized hammer and dolly. So here's your hammer and dolly. Okay, that's what this is. Your hammer and dolly. Your bottom die controls your crown. Your upper die is basically completely flat, like a hammer and dolly. Okay, this is flat on the majority part of it, little radius on the end just to keep it from leaving tracks. Okay, so but anyway, it's a motorized hammer and dolly. Okay, now what it does is this spring and the belt here, it puts the wrist motion in the hammer. Just whenever you're hammering, you're swinging. Your power comes in your wrist. You know, if you stiff arm it like this, you can't hit it as hard as if you sling it. And that's what this does. This slings it. Now what controls this amount of sling is the offset up here. So this is eccentric here. So the farther out this goes, the more it's going to swing and the harder it's going to hit. The closer this is into the center, the rotating part of the crankshaft here, closer you get to the center of the crankshaft, the less this moves, so your hits become lighter. Okay? The farther you go out, the harder it hits. It's just like this. I can only hit it this hard like this, but if I come out here, man, I can wail. So it's the same thing. All this is a motorized hammer and dolly. People ask me who's the greatest sheet metal man that ever lived. I don't know his name, but it was the guy that invented this machine, because he understood the throw of the wrist to the die. He understood that the top needed to be flat. He understood that this needed to have the radius to get the crown on the panel. He understood all of that, okay? So the guy that figured this out was the greatest sheet metal shaper that ever lived. You can shrink with it using these shrinking dies, okay? These thumbnail dies. Okay, a thumbnail die is nothing but a mechanical version of a fork tucking tool. The guy that invented these understood how the tucking tool works, because when you first run your piece of metal through here, it makes the tuck like using a tucking forks. But then when you pull it back out, it sets it like when you go back from tucking by hand and you're having to set it by hand with a hammer into an anvil or whatever. So the guy understood how a tucking tool worked and knew how to make it, put a motor on it. Same way with a linear stretch die, you know. It's just like this hammer right here. People think this hammer is for getting in corners, round corners. Well, it can be, but it's a linear stretch die, because when this hammer hits this, it only hits in a straight line like this. So its contact point is just a little oval right here in the middle. So that's a linear stretch. And you can take this hammer, and if you got good enough hand-eye coordination, you can take a piece of sheet metal on the edge and start hammering it, and you can linear stretch that edge of that panel. Well, that guy understood that, and he made a die to go in his power hammer. So the greatest metal shaper that ever lived was the guy that invented the power hammer. Don't know his name. This thing is controlled with electric motor and a foot control. The foot control is hydraulically controlled, and there's a clutch up on top here. Okay, see the clutch. Now when I push this in with my foot, you can see that it engages a little bit. See it engaging? And I can slip this clutch where I can go real slow, like this, where I'm barely tapping, and I can go real fast. That also controls how much throw this is getting. Obviously, if you go all the way to the floor with the pedal, then the clutch is going to engage all the way, and you're going to get full RPM on the motor, transferred down into here, which is full kill. Or if you need to back off, you just back off a little bit, and you can hit it softly because it's not throwing it as hard. So this 32 three-window door skin we're making, it has a lot of shape in it. So I'm going to move this eccentric out some more so I got more power, because in the beginning I got to have a whole lot of power to get here for the power. Anyway, we got all the shape in this door, a lot of shape. Okay, what we're going to do next is we're going to put the body bead in it. But in order to do that, we're going to have to pre-stretch the area where the bead's going to go. Because what happens is, if you put a bead in something, just like my fingers here, you put a bead in something, everything goes together. See, like gets shorter. See this knuckle is flat, put a bead in it, everything comes together. See? So it's got to pull the material from somewhere. So if you just put a bead in the middle of this panel and it kind of goes flat and then sucks in, that's because it's having to pull that metal from somewhere, just like my fingers here. See? In, out, in, out, in, out. Same thing. So I'm going to pre-stretch this area. We're going to figure out where that goes. How are we going to figure out where that goes? Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I just happen to have an old door skin that I use for my master templates now. Okay, see, that's another indication of how well our shape is on our new piece. Is this lays on here nice and flat. So on this, what I did on this pattern is this edge right here on the pattern, this is the bottom of the factory bead right here. So when I cut this off that original door, I trimmed it super nice up to that bead. So this is the bottom of the bead. Then I added to this, made a permanent scribe line, so when we go to turn our edges, this will be our trim line. Will be scribed and cut with our 10 snips. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up. Here's something else. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but if you measure this from here to here, and we get it the same front and back, Let's see, let's set this at 3. And let's set this one at 3. Okay, in the middle, it's 2 and 13/16. So it's 3/16 of an inch higher in the middle. Why is that? Because this bead is going around a curve. Okay. Now, if that curve, all these body lines are put in for optical illusion. If I just went straight with this right here, then whenever it might appear straight laying on the table, but when you got it turned up on the side of the car, the bead would look like it actually drooped down 3/16 of an inch because of the contour and crown of the body. So in order to have your beads level, looking at it at a side profile, sometimes they're at an arc going this way. When they're laying flat, the arc's going this way, but when they're on their side, because it all rotates down, it's straight. It's like looking at lines on a globe, you know, when you turn it. So we've determined that we have an arc going on our bead. So what I'm going to do is we're going to trim this back to 2 3/8. We're going to put a line up here. It's 2 3/8 inches above. Okay, so we've got us a line scribed 2 3/8 inches above where the factory seam will be. We're going to trim this to this line, file it real nice. This new edge is going to butt up against the guide in the power hammer when we run it through to pre-stretch the area for the bead. And then once we have our pre-stretch done, when we go to the pull max to put the bead in it, this edge will butt up against the guide as we roll it through and put the final bead in the panel with the pull max. The changes I've done to the power hammer is I have this bolt-on edge guide that's adjustable right here. It has this little wheel, and then I can run my panel up to it, and then that'll be our guide. Also, I changed the bottom die. This bottom die is a very high crown die. Doesn't look like there's a lot of crown, but it makes a lot of crown. So that's going to be our die, and we'll make several passes and then actually move our guide so we can have some overlapping passes to pre-stretch just that area where the bead is. Okay, onto the pull max. I've got it set up. This is the upper and lower die, which makes the profile for the 32 3-window door skin. And I've got it set up 2 3/8 from here to the edge of our bead. Okay, so you can see we got our body bead in the panel. One thing to remember when you pre-stretch your bead, if your pre-stretched area has a low spot or a high spot in it, it's going to transfer into your bead. So your bead could have a high spot or a low spot. It's got the right curvature with the body. You know, checking underneath the buck, looking at the buck, the stations on the buck, everything's just hitting just tits. I mean, it's great. So for a double check though, we'll take our original door skin that we used to scribe our bead to begin with, that line, we'll check it, set it up here, set it up here. It's touched in the middle, it's touching front and back. So this bead is perfectly where it needs to go with the stock original door.